Hello, drummers. Welcome to Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming. I'm Mike Trabulsie, and this is Legends of Drumming. I want to talk to you about the great, legendary jazz drummer Louie Bellson. Louie had a long and what I would consider an absolutely brilliant musical career. My introduction to Louie Bellson came when I was 17 years old. I was in my basement practicing one day, late in the afternoon, and my dad came home from work. Came down the stairs and gave me a Louie Bellson album. Yes, an album. And it was called the Louie Bellson Explosion. And I immediately fell in love with the drumming style of Louie Bellson and jazz music. Bellson just appealed to me on some deep level. And over the many years following that, I probably bought and listened to every Louie Bellson album. He was a phenomenal drummer. I would call him a big band, small group, straight ahead jazz drummer. And when I use the term straight ahead jazz, I'm talking about a style of jazz that is driving, straight ahead. It has forward propulsion. So what is it about Louie Bellson that has inspired countless numbers of drummers around the world? Louie was what I refer to as the whole musical package, or the complete musical package. Louie was obviously an amazing drummer, but he was also an accomplished composer, arranger, and band leader. Louie Bellson played piano. Now, I don't know the extent of his ability on the piano, but I know he played piano and obviously used that as a writing tool. I saw a drummer that went beyond. I believe that helped his artistry. It helped his musicality as a drummer in a very big way. I know that I am a completely different drummer today for all the years I've played piano and learned music outside of the world of drumming. So let's discuss Louie's style. The first thing that comes to mind is he had a fluidness about his drumming style, even at very fast tempos, which, by the way, it's impossible to play fast tempos if you're not relaxed. Really, that's one of the keys to playing very, very fast tempos. And there are some songs on some of his albums, they're like breakneck speed. They're very challenging to play because the tempo is so bright and it's just straight ahead jazz. And he's playing that traditional cymbal rhythm at unbelievable speeds. And he's playing it so fluidly. And I loved that, just that fluid motion about his drumming. It was just really great. And you can juxtapose that to, say, a Buddy Rich. Buddy had a very aggressive and harsh. And I use the word angular. I don't know. It means something to me. Angular way of drumming. And I'm only pointing out, and there's nothing wrong with that. Buddy Rich, was another legend of drumming. And he was amazing, unbelievable. But if you want to understand what I'm talking about with respect to the fluidness of Louie's drumming style, then watch Buddy Rich or listen to it, because you can hear it. Visually tells you something, but audibly tells you something. And it's actually great to listen to both of those guys. It's interesting because the drumming is a reflection of their personalities. Louie was a very casual, from what I understand, from what I've seen. I never met the man. I wish I had, but hey, that's life. But he was a very casual, sweet, easygoing guy, and his drumming reflected that. The second thing about Louie Bellson's drumming was, and this is, in my opinion, a big element of his style, was the melodicness of his drumming. Now, not as in playing melody on a piano or a guitar. Obviously, we don't tune the drums to intervals, and an interval is the distance between pitches on, say, a piano or a guitar. And I know, some drummers have talked about tuning their drums to specific intervals. I don't do that. And that's not what I'm talking about. But you can play the drums, you can play fills, and you can play solos with a melodicness to them. The way that you organize the tonal colors of the set within your fill to create a melodic-like pattern. And that's what Louie Bellson did. And I'm not saying everything he played was like that. There were times you could watch him soloing where he would be explosive and crashing cymbals and aggressive. I'm sure he wasn't thinking about melody then. But again, you can play the drums in a way, and your fills and solos in a way that has a melodic likeness, we'll say. And Louie did that. And that's one big thing I learned from listening to Louie Bellson. I realized he had a real melodic-like way of playing the drums, and I loved that. I just thought that was so musical. And I also think it came from him playing piano. I know myself, my drumming has changed a lot over the years. When I look back to myself pre-playing the piano and post-playing the piano, you start to hear and think a little bit differently. And so the melodicness of his drumming was another key element of his style. And again, that's not to say that he couldn't be aggressive and dynamic and explosive, because he was. And speaking of being explosive, Louie, you listen to his playing, and he had total dynamic control. Sometimes he would be playing at a whisper, tapping the cymbal bells, and then other times he would be crashing cymbals and wailing on the snare drum and the other drums and double bass drums. His drumming covered the whole dynamic range, from soft, really soft, triple P soft, all the way up to the loudest you can play. And you may not know this, but Louie Bellson was the first drummer on the planet to use two bass drums. Louie Bellson pioneered the double bass drum setup. So everybody that plays double bass drum, we can thank Louie Bellson. Yeah, he was the first one to do it. It was revolutionary when he did it. a great contribution to the world of drumming. Think of all the great stuff you can do with 2 bass drums. So we talked about the fluidness of his playing. We talked about the melodicness of his playing. We talked about the dynamic range of his playing and the pioneering of the double bass drum setup. Another thing about Louie Bellson was he had a very high level of musical maturity, as do all of the legends of drumming. Well, maybe not everyone, but pretty close to it. But, you know, to sum that up, Louie played for the music. I have an album, and honestly, I'm sorry I don't remember the name of it, but I have an album. It's a trio featuring Louie Bellson, the great jazz vocalist Ella Fitzgerald, who I also love, amazing, and there was an organist on the record. Just those 3. No bass player, no horn players, no guitar player, drums, lead vocals, and an organ player. And Louie's drumming was so simple and so musical and so appropriate. It was just, I don't know, it was just so well crafted for the context he was playing in. And this is the great legendary Louie Bellson, who could play 1,000,000 miles an hour, rip off double stroke rolls like, you know, at lightning speed, you know, double bass licks. He could be explosive, dynamic, complex, but yet he played in the context of this album. And just, I loved that album. I loved it. It was so simple and so beautiful and just really nice, tasteful musical drumming. And that shows you, it's just another of many, many examples of Louie's musical maturity and his musicality. By the way, he's got a lot of records he's recorded under his own name. I think I've bought every single one of them and listened to them. I love them. That first album that my father gave me, the Louie Bellson Explosion, I literally wore the grooves on that record out. I must have listened to it a couple thousand times. And I remember maybe 10 years after I first got that, I went out and bought another one. I guess there were still records at the time. Yeah, Louie's playing on that little trio album. You can probably find it. Louie Bellson, Ella Fitzgerald, and again, there was an organ player. I don't remember the name of that player, but it's a great little album to listen to. Louie was also a great soloist. Definitely one of the premier drum soloists in the world. During his era, him and Buddy Rich were considered the 2 greatest drummers on the planet. It was always like, who's better, Louie Bellson or Buddy Rich? Buddy Rich or Louie Bellson? But they were each great, and they each had unique, different styles. I gravitated towards Louie. Believe me, Buddy Rich was amazing, musical. He had his own thing going on, but I gravitated towards this. As a soloist, though, he was phenomenal. Really phenomenal. So musical. And he could play an extended solo and just keep the audience entertained, keep drummers entertained. You know, I'll be honest, I've gotten bored sometimes listening to drummers solo, you know, just on and on, the same thing. Louie was masterful at creating real beautiful drum solo from beginning to end that kept your interest. But one thing that he did, and I thought was amazing, was in the context of jazz drum soloing, what is common is for the drummer to say, trade 4s or trade 8s with another musician in the band. What does that mean? Briefly, in jazz song form, there's a traditional song form, among many, which is called AABA. And the A section is 8 bars. The A section, again, the second A section is another 8 bars. The B section is 8 bars, and the C section is 8 bars. And that is 32 bars of music. And that 32 bars of music has a harmonic structure to it. And there's melody. So the first A section would be 8 bars of a certain harmonic structure and a melody. The next A section is a repeat of the first A section, AA. The B section is what I call a release. You're being released from the previous 2 A sections, and you're introduced to a different section of music. It has a different harmonic structure, and it has a different melody. And then that's 8 bars. And then you go back to the last A section, which again is a repeat of the first A section. 32 bars of music. And so a typical jazz song might include the band playing as a whole through the whole piece of music, A, A, B, A. Then you might have, say, the tenor saxophone player soloing over the harmonic structure of that composition. So the bass player, the piano player, the drummer, they're playing through the composition, A, B, A, while the tenor sax player, for example, is playing a solo. And then you might have a piano solo, again, over the same harmonic structure. And then what is often done in a jazz setting is the drummer gets his chance to play some solos. They could be 4-bar solos, they could be 8-bar solos, they could be 16-bar solos, they could even be 32-bar solos, the whole length of the composition in the AABA compositional form. So what would happen is, let's just say the drummer, he's trading 4s, as they say, with the piano player. So you go to the top of the song, the top of the composition, the piano player plays the first 4 bars. Then the drummer solos where the next 4 bars of the A section would be, taking up 8 bars together. 4 bars the piano solo, 4 bars the drum solo. Then the next A section, you would do the same thing. Piano plays the first 4 bars, drummer plays the next 4 bars. And same with the B section and the C section. Now, when you get to a 16-bar solo, say you're trading 16-bar solos with the piano player, or it could be the tenor player, or anybody else in the band. Now it's like, okay, you have to keep track of 16 bars. It's hard to do a drum solo and keep track of 16 bars. 4, easy. 8, also easy. 16, a little more difficult, but doable. But when you get to 32 bars, I would venture to say almost impossible. And for those that can do it, it takes a lot of mental capacity to keep track. And you don't want to keep track. What you want to do is solo. You don't want to be thinking, okay, I'm at bar 17, now bar 21. You want to solo. So I've heard many songs on many Louie Bellson records where he regularly takes 32-bar solos. The tenor player might play a 32-bar solo over the AABA song form, and then the drummer does it. Well, how does Louie keep his place? Right? How does he keep his place and play such a beautiful solo and come in bang exactly on the 33rd bar? He has to be doing what the other musicians in the band are doing, which is using the melody as a foundation for his solo. Now, the other players, obviously, they're playing within the harmonic structure of the song, but they're also cognizant of the melody. And Louie must be singing the melody. He must be in his head hearing the AABA melody of that song and soloing to it or over it or using it as a reference point. He's just hearing it in his head and singing it. That's how you keep track in a 32-bar solo. I've heard Bellson play a 64-bar solo. There's no way, even the best counter, you could be a math genius and not be able to do a drum solo over 64 bars and come in bang on bar 65. Unless you are singing the melody. And I think that's what he was doing. And I'm going to have a whole class on that, by the way, at some point. By the time some of you get here, it's already up there, about singing and soloing. But Louie had to have been doing that. There's no other way he could have done it. He had to have been singing or hearing the melody of a song in his head, whatever the melody of the song was. And in doing so, he was playing more melodic because he was doing what the other musicians do, working with the melody. And that is, being able to do that is very high-level drumming artistry. And Louie did it with his eyes closed. He was amazing, really amazing. So I'm thinking if there's anything I've missed on the Louie Bellson style, and I think, those are the key components. The fluidness of his drumming, the melodicness of his drumming, the dynamic range of his drumming, the musical maturity of his drumming, the soloing ability, and the complete musical package. The whole musical package. For me, he's legendary, and he's absolutely earned that legendary status. And I know he's inspired millions of drummers around the world. And he deserves to be held in the high regard that he is. I hope you learned something about a really amazing drummer. If you haven't really listened to Louie Bellson, I don't care what style of drumming you're into. Definitely listen to him. And if you want, start with the same album my dad gave me all those many years ago, the Louie Bellson Explosion. And from there, you can go forward in the discography or you can go backward. But they're great, great recordings. He really left a legacy. And I just can't say, as you can tell, enough great things about the legend of Louie Bellson. Thank you for joining me here. I'm delighted that you have. I hope you learned something about another legend, one of my favorites, and I look forward to seeing you again at Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming.